I promise, though, I will begin differently from what you expect or I may have expected when I first set out on this. I will take you beyond the war of the worldviews. But I'm launching from a different site this morning because it's been a week of some eventfulness. So I ask you to hear the words of the scripture from Leviticus verse 24. Now an Israelite woman's son, whose father was an Egyptian, went out among the people of Israel, and the Israelite woman's son and a man of Israel quarreled in the camp. And the Israelite woman's son blasphemed the name and cursed, and they brought him to Moses. His mother's name was Shelomith, the daughter of Dibri of the tribe of Dan. And they put him in custody till the will of the Lord should be declared to them. And the Lord said to Moses, "Bring out of the camp him who cursed, and let all who heard him lay their hands upon his head, and let all the congregation stone him. And say to the people of Israel, whoever curses his God shall bear his sin. He who blasphemes the name of the Lord shall be put to death. All the congregation shall stone him, the sojourner as well as the native, when he blasphemes the name, shall be put to death. He who kills a man shall be put to death. He who kills a beast shall make it good, life for life. When a man causes a disfigurement in his neighbor, as he has done, it shall be done to him. Fracture for fracture, eye for eye, tooth for tooth. As he has disfigured a man, he shall be disfigured. He who kills a beast shall make it good, and he who kills a man shall be put to death. You shall have one law for the sojourner and for the native, for I am the Lord your God." So Moses spoke to the people of Israel, and they brought him who had cursed out of the camp, and stoned him with stones. Thus the people of Israel did as the Lord commanded Moses. Hear the reading of the biblical Lord. This is my Bible from the church I grew up in. It was given to me when I was about 9 years old. It's a Revised Standard Version. My church of origin, as we might speak of a family of origin, was the Methodist Church, which became the United Methodist Church, and which this week is becoming the Disunited Methodist Church. And it's been a hard week for me in that spirit for reasons that I'll talk about and kind of launch my sense of what a war of the worldviews is in terms of what happened this week in the church of my origin. There was a specially called convocation in St. Louis to vote on what policy the United Methodist Church would adopt with respect to gay, lesbian, transgendered, and various other kinds of queer people in terms of church teaching. And the vote was 438 to 384 for what was called the traditional plan, reaffirming decades, and perhaps longer than decades, of the church's teachings and regulations, which took a certain stand with respect to that issue. There had been a civil disobedience movement, and I said shouldn't put that in past tense, I'm sure there still is, especially among clergy, liberal or friends of, or themselves LGBTQ. And as John Lonkers wrote in support of the winning traditionalist plan, this simply prevents disobedience to standards we have already had in place for decades. End quote. Rules are rules. We're told that in sexuality, it is not the desire that homosexuals experience that is sinful and an abomination to the Lord. It is acting on that desire. And what about those who curse? how shall we stone those who curse? So I say, in the name of cursing, God damn the Methodist Church. God damn the fetish of reading the Bible as literal authority. I say, let us find charity in our hearts for those unfortunates who feel an urge to be stupid, judgmental, and cruel. But if they rise above that, let us be charitable. But God damn their righteous pronouncements, God damn their institutional rules, and God damn what they are doing in His name to generations. Why am I upset by this? Why don't I just, as many people do, say, that's religion for you, right? It's based on old moralities. It's not based on truth. It's a complete myth. Look to science. If you look to science, you'll find all kinds of enlightened measures of how we have improved the human condition by turning away from religion. That's what many atheists would say. But what I think many atheists do not get is that religion is not only a set of creeds. Religion is not only a position on a social issue. Religion is more than just a worldview in the sense of a story. To belong to a religious tradition, to belong to a church, is to have a place in which not only you, but your children and their children, perhaps your parents, perhaps your grandparents, it's something that carries across generations with something deeply rooted and meant to endure a long, long time. If I were forced to choose between Leviticus and a position of absolute relativism, whatever you want, I would say this, because it could be a monkey's paw kind of thing. You need to be careful about what the terms are. I would say, is this a choice for right now, or is this a choice for from this point forward? If it's for right now, give me relativism. I can't stand this Leviticus crap. But think about where our culture is going and where our culture would go completely without the guidance of traditional values like the ones inscribed, perhaps too literally, in Leviticus. Think of what a science that was not otherwise guided by values of humanity might come to in the kind of age that we're facing, with the acceleration of information, of calculating power, of the coding of the genome, of biotechnology, of artificial intelligence. Where might we be headed? The author of *Sapiens*, which is wonderfully got legs on the bestseller list, Yuval Harari, has a new book called 21 Lessons for the 21st Century. And in that book, he indicates that we may be in trouble in terms of what's happening technologically, scientifically, in terms of the way we live. In short, what he's saying is that our world is changing faster than our worldview can keep up with. And our old worldviews are in trouble. We need new worldviews, but we haven't got what's there to replace it yet. Should I take the blue or the either one? Okay. We'll see if I wake up in the Matrix or not. Thank you, Carol. So, given what Harari is saying, given the bleak choice that's put out there, none of us wants to have to choose that. None of us wants to have to make a choice between a whole constellation of values within which most of us have grown up in one way or another, and a world that seems completely cut off from that. So I can relate to religionists who, of course I can relate to the liberal ones, the Bishop Shelby's poems are easy, but I can also relate to more conservative, more traditional religionists who feel like something absolutely pivotal in life is being lost, and that without it we have no compass, that without it we're just cut adrift, we're lost in space. We're like, Will, not. So when I speak of the war of the worldviews, I'm talking about on the one side, people who are holding on to that, who are in the death throes perhaps of what they grew up with by way of values, religion, and faith, and who will not go gentle into that good secular night. And on the other side of that, people who see the progress that centuries of liberal thinking have brought and see that the way forward is to be faithful to the deeper core of, for instance, Christian love, for instance, without being as wedded to the black letters of Leviticus. When I grew up, it was easy in that sense. When I grew up, nobody that I knew of, no one I knew of, thought that you had to choose between religion and science. No one I knew of thought that the world was, I don't know, however long it's been since we've really been brewing beer. That's about, I think, the age that the Texas folks think. No one thought that way. No one thought that there was a contradiction between God created the world and the world has evolved in a certain way. Couldn't God be smart enough to do that? I mean, I think. So mine was a different world. Mine was a world which, among other things, didn't have to face the issue that was voted on this week, at least not publicly. Because in my world, let's say into the 1960s anyway, I didn't know anyone who was openly gay. There might have been such people, but I couldn't have pointed to them. So in that world, I think what we had was we had a view that this is what's true about my spirit. I go to church for that. This is what's true about the physical world I live in. I read science for that, or read about it, or if I wanted to anyway. And when it comes to the social world, the world of political relationships and of society, I, like every other American, believed in liberalism. As Harari points out, World War II was the death of fascism as a great story of how we can live together globally. The fall of the Soviet Union was the end of the great story of communism as a global solution. It only left one great worldview of how we can live together globally, the liberalist one. Now, liberalism, in a sense, both that conservatives go back to Tea Party values of 1776, and in the sense that progressives, like Obama, would point to the ideals that we're continually striving to reach even better than that. So the whole field of debate, I would say even including such socialists as everybody Donald Trump doesn't like, that the whole debate through my lifetime within the United States has been a debate within that worldview. So Harari is pointing out that along with the demise of religion, along with the pressing challenges of science, along with the people who, as scientists, or in the name of science, as the new atheists, philosophers, psychologists, are increasingly bold about decrying, demeaning, dismissing whatever religion might have to offer. That in that environment, we're in a different world from the world that I was in when I was a young person. And I don't want what was of importance in the world that formed me from within to be lost. Just like those traditionalists who are more likely to shop at Walmart, and more likely to vote for a different candidate, more likely to drive a truck that's jacked up in one way or another and burns all kinds of fuel. And, I don't know.
Watch Fox.
Huh?
Watch Fox TV.
Okay. But I get it. I get it in a way that brings out for me the importance of having a sense of coherence in the world. And what I believe, as Carol indicated, is that philosophy is most responsible for pointing us forward when we reach an impasse. And Carol said to me as we were discussing this, about talking about the service, she said, well, isn't that your job as philosophers? And I said, yes, exactly. Not as much my job as an aging baby boomer who belongs to the generation that's made our cultural world almost inhabitable. Not my job to say what the right worldview is. We got plenty of that. My job might be to point a path that isn't just a path, but to point a way forward for the next generation to find their world of philosophy. Hence my little science fiction construction of a social world that's being torn apart, and my little analogy to that science fiction story of a next generation looking to philosophical space. What might they find? They'll certainly find that one of the options there is the planet we've traveled back and forth to, called Leviticus. One of the options they'll find is the planet that we're increasingly colonizing, called scientific empiricism, evolutionary materialism, call it what you want. It's governed by the principles of Darwin, linked with artificial intelligence and a generation of further scientific applications. Those are plenty evident. But is there something else out there? Is there some other way of thinking deeply about how we belong in the world and how we can think forward into something that isn't just a compromise between where we're stuck now, but is a whole other way of seeing it? Well, that'd be cool, wouldn't it? Hey, look at this. I think that the most important thing that has happened to philosophy since the Holocaust is what's called postmodernism in cultural terms. There was a whole movement that swept through the arts and architecture, culture, and through theory, through philosophy, especially in the late 60s and into the 70s and beyond, that uprooted all the things that we were taking for granted in philosophy, in theory, even in science. The value of certainty, for instance. Within 20th century science, we already find in Heisenberg's principle that you can't be certain about everything in science. You've got to pick your spots. Are you going to be really, really certain about the velocity or the position? Because the more you know about one, the less you know about the other. That's just one example of how certainty can break down. We can get into the philosophical project that came out of Socrates through Plato and beyond that says, look, what we really want to get at is that truth which is final and unchanging. And what the postmodern theorists found and argued and had, I think, some success in convincing people of at the elite levels of Western culture anyway, is that you can't close off the questions. You can't come to the end of the line. It is the nature of science to keep exploring. It is the nature of philosophy to keep questioning. And it's got much more powerful mechanisms for questioning than it does for answering. Which is one of the points that Pirsig makes, for those of you who've read Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. For every scientific hypothesis you test, you generate more questions than you rule out false hypotheses. It's in the very nature of the game. And I was saying the nature of the game that Socrates taught us and that philosophers have developed as we think critically about things. And if I was reading the sports page properly, because it's not what I looked to the sports page for, someone from a baseball team, a manager, was quoting a management expert on what the millennial generation looks for, and one of the insights that's become commonplace in dealing with millennials is you've got to be patient when they keep asking why. They're not being critical, they're just thinking critically because they've been taught to do that. Because, aha, their baby boomer parents who were philosophers and social workers and that kind of thing made sure that the schools were more intent on teaching the thinking critically. And you know what? One of the effects of attention to thinking critically is that IQs have gone up as measured over the course of the last century. I mention that as an aside, but it's an interesting point for me in terms of the value of that kind of endeavor, if you like intelligence. A lot of people don't. Sometimes they're vice presidents, sometimes they're president, or just candidates for that. So, what I'm thinking is that if my daughter's generation of millennials is inclined to ask why, they may be working in an environment where they're not seeing a lot of resources to do anything with a question about why are we thinking this way about the world. They may have a lot of reasons to just live their lives without getting involved in these debates that the baby boomers are warring over. And so one of the things that we want to do is we want to clear a space in view. Just as when I was young, we were at war in Vietnam, there was racism. My Christian values were being violated all over the place while the president lied to me about what's going on. And that was a hard place to be, but it sure encouraged me to think and to look for alternatives, you know. And I could do that more easily in an age where I could believe that science was a path and religion might be a path and liberal values might be a path. So how do we bring some of those same resources through today? What I want to suggest is the Zarathustra project, to follow on the heels of Apollo, etc. Something in the spirit of SpaceX that would be not threatened by a postmodern way of thinking, by the challenges of people responding to diversity and to multi-everythingism, but that would be excited by imaginative opportunities for new launches into new spaces, just as yesterday Cape Canaveral, site of the Apollo launches, was the site of a public-private partnership launch, right? Rocket off to dock with the space shuttle. I mean, with the, you know. Thank you. Just like that, only in the realm of thought, in the realm of philosophy, in the realm of theorizing. And well, maybe it could be this. So I want to quickly share my formula, not my formula, but what one of the engineering teams with the Zarathustra project has been working on. You probably have heard that the go wherever you want, it's up to you, relativism project hasn't been working out too well on the post-truth team. There's no way to guide that voyage. It just goes wherever it wants to. But inspired by the French thinker Jacques Derrida, primarily of the late 20th century, this team is going by 3 of his engineering discoveries in the realm of theory. The first of those discoveries, you don't have to get all this stuff. I'm just giving you an indication that there's unused stuff that we can use to fly forward from. Okay? Derrida has what might be used as a 3-stage rocket. Okay? The first stage for the thrust we'll call the deconstructor. And what the deconstructor does is it utilizes the contradiction in the texts of what came before as fuel, so that if you're absolutely intent on certainty, you'll find within your own arguments for that there's necessary uncertainty that has to go along with it, and the process through which we show that fuels questioning that's in an opposite direction to the certainty you were trying to get to, but we've used your arguments to get there. Now that's complicated, it's abstract. But the key is, it's not just a fantasy, it's not just made up. It's an argument that came from people who had read very carefully and extensively in some of the best thinkers up to that time in philosophy. And here's where the second stage comes in, what I call the double gesture. That's actually Derrida's term. He says, on the one hand, the way it was just won't stand up. On the other hand, we don't have a real good alternative. We can't just go to the alternative. And so he would take a word like being. He'd say, we can't just talk about being like we know what it is, but we can't do without it. So we leave the word with an X through it. We put it under erasure so you can see this isn't good enough, but it's still there. Okay? So the double gesture is you do two strategies at once. And we know younger generations have gotten real good at multitasking. That's how they live, right? So what do? One thing you do is you make an argument from where we are right now toward where you want to go. And you make that an argument that people can follow. That's one of the things you do. At the same time, you say, what is the craziest, most out of bounds, rule-breaking, transgressive, unintelligible way we can write? Let's do that. Let's try that. So you're doing both at once. You're being intelligible and unintelligible at the same time. Is that playful?
Right.
But it's playful in a way that can also take some people along with you, open some paths that people can follow. The third stage of the rocket is dissemination. And that's the payoff. Because this generation knows that we cannot master the truth. They know that what we think as, let's say, white European descended upper middle class college educated X, Y's or Z's in such a place, that's one way of understanding it, but it's problematic to think that within our assumptions we're going to get the whole thing right. So the opposite of that is, well, then nobody's got the truth. There can't be such a thing as the truth. But what dissemination does is say, so let's turn loose a lot of possibilities at once, and we'll let it do what poetry does. What does a poem do? A poem walks on its own. But where that poem walks is not necessarily where the author pointed it. You reading that poem may find that it walks in a completely different doorway from the one that the person writing it might have had in mind. Because that's what poetry does, and Derrida says that's what all writing does, and all thinking is writing. Once it influences us, all speaking that influences us is writing. Understand that that's in the nature of things and embrace that. Embrace that multiplicity, embrace that diversity, embrace that mission that is going forward in ways that we can't predict. But get this, that every individual who wants to play in that game can grab any one of those threads and any combination of threads they want and move forward with that. That's what I see for our philosophical future. That's what I see for our millennials, our next gens, and those moving forward. I see not that we will have a worldview that is better than the ones we've got now. There won't be one truth that we land on. I see people who share with each other in networked ways the enjoyment of worldviewing. I see worldviewing, or if you prefer storying, thinking even, I see worldviewing as a process of generations playing with all these possibilities and moving forward perhaps as powerfully as the Greeks did in the days of Socrates and Plato and Aristotle. I think that just as those Greeks had the innocence of the beginning, that the rules weren't set yet, that everything was open, we have the innocence of the end. We have the innocence of after the Holocaust, after the Methodist Church does things like this, after the scientists tell us that we're nothing but selfish genes being driven in a certain deterministic way, after things don't add up anymore, all bets are off. We are free to just play with it and see where it goes. So I see postmodernism that has so spooked philosophers and cultural gatekeepers as a liberating opportunity to go beyond postmodernism, to worldviews we haven't even thought of yet, beyond worldviews themselves, to a kind of worldviewing that will be much more in tune with what our life world, the world of our cultural engagement, already is. And so I end with this thought. If a group of students could be well begun on what we've been unable to do for 20 years, if the Parkland students can build what they're building with the March for Our Lives movement, What can generations do with thought? As rich as that soil we've accumulated for them, what could they do with that? Wow, that inspires me. Thank you very much.
Thank you.